I had been managing nightclub floors in Hong Kong for 17 years when I learned that true fighting has nothing to do with throwing punches. The night was October 15th, 1978, and I thought I understood violence. I had seen it all: broken bottles, thrown chairs, men bleeding on marble floors. But in 90 seconds, watching a young man named Jackie Chan, everything I believed about fighting and control was turned upside down, and I realized that mastery looks nothing like what most people expect. The Golden Dragon sat in the heart of Tsim Sha Tsui, 3 floors of controlled chaos that attracted everyone from shipping magnates to street-level enforcers. My job was simple: keep the peace, manage the flow, and make sure nobody died on my watch. After 17 years, I could read a room like a map. I knew which tables generated trouble, which corners created blind spots, and which exit routes stayed clear when tempers flared. The main floor was my domain: 47 round tables, 6 support pillars, 3 service corridors, and exactly 11 steps from the center bar to the side emergency exit. Everything about crowd control came down to geometry. Tables positioned too close created choke points where arguments became fights. The main aisle was wide enough for staff to move quickly, but narrow enough that 2 angry men could block it completely. I had seen it happen dozens of times. Someone gets offended, steps into that aisle, and suddenly 400 people are trapped watching a confrontation they cannot escape. That night, the energy felt different. The cigarette haze hung thicker than usual, mixing with perfume and nervous sweat. Glasses clinked with sharper edges. Conversations carried undertones of tension. When a room felt tight, trouble was coming. I just did not know it would arrive in the form of a soft-spoken young man who moved like water through spaces I thought I controlled. By 10 o'clock, the Golden Dragon was approaching capacity. The shipping executive crowd occupied the premium tables. Local business owners filled the middle section, networking over expensive whiskey. And scattered throughout were the men who made their living in ways that did not appear on business cards. I knew them all by sight, knew their patterns. Jackie Chan walked into my club without fanfare, moving through the entrance like smoke, drifting between tables with an economy of motion that most people would not notice. But I noticed everything. His shoulders never touched a chair back. His feet never scraped against tile. He found gaps in the crowd that seemed too narrow for passage, yet somehow accommodated him perfectly. This was functional grace, the kind that came from understanding space at an instinctive level. He was young, maybe 24, dressed in simple dark clothes. He ordered tea, not alcohol, and chose a table near the back wall where he could observe without being observed. His chair was angled to give him clear views of both the main aisle and the emergency exit. His back was protected by the wall, but he sat close enough to the edge that he could move in any direction without shifting furniture. He was mapping the room just as I did, but for different reasons. I watched him study the crowd with eyes that cataloged details most people ignored. He noted which tables were occupied by groups versus couples. He observed the staff patterns, the rhythm of servers. He identified the men who carried themselves like enforcers, the subtle hierarchies that determined who moved aside when pathways crossed. This young man was reading my club like a text, absorbing information about space and power and human behavior with systematic attention. The trouble started at table 17. 5 men from one of the mid-level fishing operations, drunk enough to feel bold, but sober enough to coordinate. They had been eyeing Jackie since his arrival, making comments that gradually escalated from observation to challenge. Their leader, a thick-necked man named Chen, whose reputation for violence exceeded his intelligence, stood up with deliberate slowness. His friends followed, forming a semicircle that was clearly intended to be seen by everyone in the vicinity. Chen moved into the main aisle, blocking the direct path between Jackie's table and the front entrance. His companions spread out in a formation that created a controlled space with limited exit options. This was classic intimidation. Make the target feel trapped, force them to either submit or fight, ensure any confrontation happened with an audience. I started moving immediately, following protocols developed over 17 years. My hand found the brass keyring in my jacket pocket, selecting the key for the side exit. My other hand touched the folded floor plan against my inner jacket lining, the familiar texture helping me think clearly about distances and angles. I positioned myself where I could intervene if necessary, but far enough away that my presence would not escalate tensions. Jackie continued drinking his tea, his posture unchanged, expression neutral, hands relaxed on the table. But I noticed subtle shifts indicating heightened awareness. His breathing had slowed, becoming deeper and controlled. His eyes were no longer casually observing, but calculating specific distances and tracking multiple moving targets. Chen approached with the swagger of a man who believed his reputation preceded him. Conversations at nearby tables grew quieter as patrons sensed the developing confrontation. The Golden Dragon's atmosphere was shifting toward something sharper and more dangerous. I could feel the room holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen when an unstoppable force met an immovable object. But Jackie Chan was neither unstoppable nor immovable. He was something else entirely, something my 17 years of experience had not prepared me to understand. Chen reached Jackie's table and planted his hands on the surface, leaning forward in a gesture that was universally recognized as the prelude to either submission or violence. His voice was loud enough to carry to the surrounding tables, but controlled enough to maintain the pretense of civilized conversation. He suggested that Jackie might be more comfortable at a different establishment, one that catered to people who understood their place in the local hierarchy. The insult was carefully crafted to require either an apology or a physical response. Jackie's table was positioned near one of the support pillars, with barely enough space for a single person to pass between the table edge and the pillar face. Chen's positioning blocked the direct route to the main aisle, while his companions had spread out to cover the other apparent exit angles. From any conventional perspective, Jackie was effectively cornered. The geometry of the situation seemed to offer only two choices: fight his way out or submit to whatever Chen intended to demonstrate about power and respect. The room's attention had focused completely on this small section of floor space near the back wall. Conversations had stopped at tables within viewing distance, and even the staff had slowed their movements to observe what was unfolding. The energy in the room had shifted from anticipation to inevitability. Everyone present understood the dynamics at play, understood that Chen had created a situation where Jackie's options were severely limited. I moved closer, calculating how quickly I could reach the confrontation if intervention became necessary. My hand was already selecting the appropriate keys for the nearest exit routes, and my mind was mapping the fastest path to summon additional security if the situation escalated beyond what I could manage alone. But something in Jackie's demeanor made me hesitate. He did not look like a man who was trapped. He looked like a man who was thinking. Jackie stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. His hands remained visible, his posture relaxed, his expression politely attentive, as if Chen had just offered him directions to a nearby restaurant. This was not the body language of someone preparing for violence or positioning for escape. This was something entirely different, something that did not fit into any of the categories I used to predict and manage dangerous situations. Instead of stepping back toward the wall or forward into confrontation, Jackie moved laterally. One small step to his left, then another, adjusting his position relative to the table and pillar without appearing to retreat or advance. The movement was so subtle that most observers probably did not notice it consciously, but it changed the entire geometry of the confrontation. Suddenly, the space that had seemed completely controlled by Chen and his companions contained new possibilities, new angles, new options that had not existed moments before. Chen tried to compensate, shifting his own position to maintain the advantages he thought he had established. But Jackie's movement had been more sophisticated than simple lateral repositioning. He had altered not just his location, but his relationship to every element in the immediate environment. The pillar that had seemed like part of his trap was now positioned to potentially obstruct Chen's movements. The table that had confined his options was now angled to provide a barrier between himself and some of Chen's companions. The change was subtle enough that Chen did not immediately recognize what had happened. He continued his intimidation routine, moving closer and speaking louder, apparently confident that his superior numbers and strategic positioning would force the outcome he desired. But I could see what Chen could not. Jackie had transformed a trap into a puzzle, and he was several moves ahead of everyone else involved. What happened next occurred so quickly and smoothly that it seemed almost choreographed, as if the entire sequence had been rehearsed and was now being performed for an audience that did not realize they were watching theater rather than spontaneous confrontation. Jackie moved through the space between table and pillar like liquid flowing through a narrow channel, his body adjusting to accommodate the constraints while maintaining perfect control and balance. As he moved, he used the table itself as a reference point, not for support, but for guidance. His hand brushed along the table edge, not gripping or pushing, but maintaining contact that helped him navigate the tight space with precision. Chen lunged forward to intercept him, but Jackie's timing was perfect. He passed through the narrowest part of the gap exactly as Chen committed to a movement that left the larger man momentarily off balance and unable to adjust his trajectory. The pillar, which had seemed like part of Jackie's confinement, became an obstacle for Chen instead. As Chen tried to follow Jackie's path, he found himself constrained by the same geometric limitations that he had thought were working in his favor. By the time he had repositioned himself to continue the pursuit, Jackie was no longer where Chen expected him to be. Chen's companions found themselves equally wrong-footed. The formation that had seemed to control all of Jackie's exit options was suddenly irrelevant because Jackie was not moving toward any of the exits they had identified and covered. Instead, he was threading through spaces they had not considered significant, using furniture and architecture not as obstacles to be overcome, but as tools to be utilized in a larger strategy that was only becoming clear as it unfolded. I realized I was watching something I had never seen before in 17 years of managing nightclub conflicts. Jackie was not fighting, and he was not fleeing. He was redefining the situation entirely, transforming a confrontation into a demonstration of spatial mastery that left his opponents confused and off balance without any actual physical contact occurring. For perhaps 10 seconds, the entire section of the nightclub went completely silent. Jackie had emerged from what everyone had perceived as an inescapable corner, and Chen and his companions were now standing in awkward positions around an empty table, looking like actors who had forgotten their lines in the middle of a performance. The expected violence had not occurred, but something else had happened, something that the audience was struggling to categorize and understand. Jackie had not humiliated his opponents through superior fighting skill or intimidating presence. He had simply made their strategy irrelevant by refusing to engage with it on their terms. The trap they had set had been rendered meaningless not through force, but through movement, not through confrontation, but through redefinition of what the confrontation actually was. The silence was filled with confused energy as everyone present tried to process what they had witnessed. Chen's face showed a mixture of anger and bewilderment as he attempted to understand how his carefully planned demonstration of power had become something else entirely. His companions looked around uncertainly, unsure whether to continue their intimidation attempts or retreat from a situation that no longer made sense. Jackie stood calmly near the bar, still holding his teacup, his expression unchanged from the polite attention he had shown throughout the entire encounter. He had not run away, had not fought back, had not submitted, and had not escalated. He had done something that existed outside the normal categories of response that everyone expected in situations like this. I began moving toward the side exit, anticipating that Jackie would recognize the wisdom of leaving before Chen regrouped, and decided to pursue the confrontation through more conventional means. But Jackie seemed in no hurry to escape. He finished his tea with the same deliberate calm he had maintained throughout the encounter, placed some money on the bar to cover his tab, and nodded politely to the bartender as if nothing unusual had occurred. Only then did he begin moving toward the door, but even his exit demonstrated the same spatial awareness that had characterized his earlier movements. He chose a path through the club that took him near several tables where other potential troublemakers were seated, but he moved in such a way that his presence never felt threatening or challenging to anyone. He navigated around chairs and between servers with the same liquid grace he had shown earlier. I reached the side exit first and had my key ready when Jackie arrived. As I unlocked the door, the small brass keys jingled softly, the only sound that marked this moment as different from any other routine departure. Jackie paused in the doorway and looked back at the room he was leaving, not with the satisfaction of someone who had won a victory, but with the calm assessment of someone who had completed a task. The cool night air outside carried the sounds of Hong Kong's endless activity. Traffic, construction, distant music from other establishments, the complex urban symphony that never stopped. Inside the Golden Dragon, I could hear the gradual resumption of normal nightclub noise as conversations restarted and the tension began to dissipate. But something fundamental had changed in that room. Standing outside the Golden Dragon with Jackie Chan, I realized that everything I thought I knew about managing conflict was based on incomplete understanding. For 17 years, I had been thinking about violence and de-escalation as opposite strategies, two different approaches to handling dangerous situations. I had developed sophisticated techniques for preventing fights and managing crowds, but all of my methods were based on the assumption that the choice was between fighting and not fighting, between aggression and submission. Jackie had shown me a third option that I had never considered, making the fight irrelevant. He had not defeated his opponents through superior strength or intimidation. He had not avoided them through superior speed or stealth. He had simply refused to participate in the type of encounter they wanted to create, transforming it into something else entirely through movement and awareness and perfect understanding of how space and timing could be used as tools. I asked him how he had known that the narrow passage beside the pillar would become an advantage rather than a trap. He smiled and said that every space had multiple possibilities built into it. Most people only saw the obvious ones. The corner that looked like confinement was also a position with walls for protection and multiple angles for movement. The pillar that appeared to limit options also limited his opponent's ability to coordinate their movements. He had been reading the room the same way I read it, but with different knowledge and different intentions. Where I saw potential problems to be prevented, he saw potential solutions to be utilized. Where I identified choke points and blind spots as liabilities, he recognized them as tools that could be employed if understood properly. As I watched Jackie disappear into the Hong Kong night, I understood that mastery was not about winning fights, but about making fights unnecessary. True control was not about imposing your will through force, but about understanding systems so completely that you could navigate through them without creating friction or resistance. The most powerful responses to aggression might be responses that transformed the nature of the aggression itself. In my 17 years of managing nightclub floors, I had become expert at recognizing and preventing violence through conventional security methods. I could spot troublemakers, anticipate conflicts, position myself for quick intervention, and coordinate with staff to maintain order through presence and authority. But Jackie had demonstrated possibilities that existed beyond the traditional security paradigm, possibilities that required different types of knowledge and different types of skill. The young man had moved through a dangerous situation like water flowing around rocks. finding the path of least resistance while never losing sight of his destination. He had turned potential violence into actual demonstration, transforming what could have been a damaging fight into a teaching moment that left everyone involved with new questions about power, control, and the difference between strength and mastery. I returned to my duties inside the Golden Dragon, but everything looked different now. The same tables and pillars and corridors that I had been managing for 17 years were suddenly filled with new possibilities, new potential solutions, new ways of thinking about how space and movement and human psychology could be integrated into more sophisticated approaches to maintaining peace and safety. Some people fight to win. Some people fight to prove points or establish dominance or work through frustrations that have nothing to do with the immediate situation. But the best people, the truly masterful ones, find ways to move through conflict without participating in it, to resolve dangerous situations without creating more danger, to transform violence into something else entirely through understanding and skill and perfect timing. Jackie Chan taught me that the most effective response to aggression might be response that made aggression impossible, rather than response that defeated aggression directly. The strongest defense might be movement that rendered offense irrelevant. The deepest knowledge might be understanding that every trap contained the tools for escape if you knew how to see them and how to use them. That night in the Golden Dragon changed how I approached every difficult situation afterward. Instead of asking how to stop problems from happening, I began asking how to transform problems into solutions. Instead of trying to control people and situations through authority and position, I learned to look for ways that existing energies and dynamics could be redirected toward more positive outcomes. 17 years of experience had taught me to manage nightclub floors. 90 Seconds with Jackie Chan taught me to understand them.